All right, well, welcome back to Imperfect Together. We are in the middle of a series on sexual integrity and looking at what is sexual integrity. We're getting to part 3 of that. And so we've kind of been building on along as we've been going along. So if this is your first time, I'm Chris. Glad you're here. But you could also go back and check out some past episodes because we've been building along with that. But I want to jump in by starting with the story. And it's actually the other part to the story that I started last week where I ended up leaving my wife here to work while I went on vacation with my kids. Not a good idea, but if you want to know more about that, you can go check that out. But I want to introduce you to somebody. This is Marla. And Marla, if you can't tell, is a leopard. And she has her name written on her wrist right here. But why am I telling you Marla? So Marla was my daughter's doll. And when we went on this trip, my son was already in Georgia, and I was going to a wedding, and my son was with my grandparents, and so he was already hanging out. So Carly, my daughter, we were going to fly out, and they were going to pick us up, and I was going to go to a wedding, and I was going to go to the lake. And so when we were there, first the flight was delayed, and so that caused some problems. And then we ended up getting to Atlanta. My grandparents picked us up, and then we went to eat at a restaurant. And while we were at the restaurant, having a good meal, we came out to go back home, and my daughter went around the car. And when she went around the car, she started freaking out. And we were just walking to the car. We didn't know what was going on. She was screaming. She didn't know how to handle it. And so we got over there and realized that the car window was just knocked out. It was shattered. So somebody had busted into the car, and they stole everything. So remember, we just came from the airport. So we checked in the back, and they opened the back. Everything's gone. My backpack with my computer and everything in it was gone. My suitcase with all my wedding stuff and clothes were gone. Carly's backpack with her iPad, and she had an old phone in there and some different stuff. That was all gone, and her suitcase was gone. And in that suitcase was Marla. Now, Carly was not happy about this. She was about 5 or 6 at the time. And she started crying, and she was telling me, "Dad, I don't care about anything else. All I want is Marla. I just want Marla back." Now, here's the thing about Marla that we didn't know at the time till I tried to go find another Marla, is they don't make Marla anymore. Apparently, she is unique, one of a kind. They make some that look like this, but they're a snow leopard. They're white, and they have this blue face, and she didn't want that one. She wanted this Marla. So I'm having to go on the hunt to find this Marla because it's the only thing that she actually cared about and valued in her bag. And so I went and found this one, and we bought it on eBay for $100. $100 for this little thing. Now, to me, I did not want to do it. I tried to buy her a little one, and that didn't work. So we had to end up going to buy this thing. But here's the thing. Now that we have Marla, we have to protect her. Marla doesn't go anywhere anymore. She doesn't go spend the night at friends' houses. She doesn't go on trips with us anymore. She stays home in the room because there are no more Marlas, right? We had to protect it because it cost us something, and it's one of a kind. And here's the thing about value when you value something. Like my daughter valued this more than anything else. And when you value something, you protect it, and you appreciate it, and you make it a priority. So why am I telling you this? Because when we talk about sexual integrity, we're pretty much talking about the same thing. That's really what sexual integrity is all about. And just to remind you what sexual integrity is choosing to respond to the sexual things that we feel, think, or desire in a way that respects ourselves, others, and God. Now, the problem is that we live in this over-sexualized world that has completely distorted God's view of what sex and sexual desires are. And so this leaves us feeling confused because we don't know, well, what does God really think? This is what the world says and all this kind of stuff. So to give you an example of what I'm talking about, I got this email from a student. This is not one of my students. This is just one I found. But she was very confused on this idea of sex. I'm going to read it to you, and then we'll talk about it. It says, "I'm confused about sex. Not the how, I learned that a long time ago, but the when. My mom tells me to wait till marriage, and my student pastor gives me the same advice. But everywhere else, the message is so clearly, go for it. Or if you're still a virgin, you're a total loser. Friends at school tell me how great sex is and how experienced they are. All the music I listen to and the movies I watch talk about it all the time and just make it seem perfectly normal. And my boyfriend keeps telling me that having sex will strengthen our relationships. So what am I supposed to think? It seems like everybody's enjoying this really fantastic experience, and I'm like a nun or something. Is saving myself for marriage really worth it? And so if I were guessing, I'd say a lot of you maybe have that same questions. Maybe you feel those same ways of, with everything I know about sex, is what God says about it really worth it? Or whatever the church tries to say? Are they just trying to keep me from enjoying something fun? Or whatever it is. And so before we can learn to actually value sexual integrity, first we have to understand, well, what does God actually say about it through his word, through the Bible? And then how can we use that to enhance our life rather than complicate our lives? So to do that, we're going to jump back into the book that we were talking about last week in 1 Corinthians 16, or chapter 6. And here's the thing. The church in Corinth was a very new church that Paul established. So just to give you a little bit of a background. And think of it almost like Las Vegas, except on the coast, right? It was this port city. A lot of business went through there, but there was a lot of partying. And that's basically all these people knew until Paul came in and said, hey, they told him about this guy named Jesus. They said, there's a different way to live your life. And so this church had a lot of questions. They're like, well, this is what kind of everybody else that I've ever known does. And you're telling me that this is the way Jesus calls us to follow. So they had questions. So they would write letters to Paul, say, hey, Paul. And they would just ask him all these different questions. And that's basically what 1 Corinthians is. It's Paul's letter back to them answering a lot of these questions. And so last week, we looked at chapter 6, verse 12, and we're going to start there, and we're going to start building upon that. So let me read it to you real quick. It says, you say that I'm allowed to do anything, but not everything is good for you. And even though I am allowed to do anything, I must not become a slave to anything. You say food was made for the stomach and the stomach for food. This is true, though someday God will do away with both of them. But you can't say that our bodies were made for sexual immorality. They were made for the Lord, and the Lord cares about our bodies. So let's stop there for a second. The first thing that we have to understand is that our bodies are actually made for the Lord, and that he cares about our bodies. So God cares about you, and he has a very specific design and a plan for your body and what you do with it because he created you. So we'll continue on with this. Let's jump into verse 15. It says, don't you realize that your bodies are actually part of Christ? Should a man take his body, which is part of Christ, and join it to a prostitute? Never. And don't you realize that if a man joins himself to a prostitute, he becomes one body with her? For the scripture says, the two are united into one. But the person who is joined to the Lord is one spirit with him. So run from sexual sin. No other sin so clearly affects the body as this one does. For sexual immorality is a sin against your own body. Don't you realize that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who lives in you and was given to you by God? You do not belong to yourself, for God bought you with a high price, so you must honor God with your body. Now listen, there is a lot to unpack in these verses, and we're not going to really get into a lot of it. But essentially, what we catch here is they were having a lot of questions. They were used to sleeping with prostitutes or being able to do whatever they wanted with their bodies. And essentially they thought, okay, Jesus is a spiritual thing, and so my spirit and all that kind of stuff is one thing, but my body's completely separate. And that's essentially what they were getting at, was Paul saying, look, that's not how it works. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And that's why he tied in that your body actually belongs to God. And here's some things that I want to make note of. He was talking about a prostitute, but let's trade that out for anybody. It doesn't matter who it is. When two people come together, something different happens and the two actually become one. And he was referencing something that God said back in the very beginning in Genesis chapter 2, when he said, for this reason, you will leave your father and your mother, and the two will become one. Because sex is something that's so much more than just something physical. It actually entails the whole body. It gets the whole body involved, spirit emotion, soul, and it is the most intimate sharing that any human will ever experience, right? That's what it was created for. It was this neat, unique, special creation, this special union that takes place when two people are joined together. So it's not just something physical like so many of us want to believe, but there's more to it. There's more that happens. And then we're going to see the next part of it here, and we jump into chapter 7. It says this: because there is so much sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman should have her own husband. The husband should fulfill his wife's sexual needs, and the wife should fulfill her husband's needs. Now, first of all, you probably didn't think that was in the Bible, right? That's kind of a weird, like, oh man, that is something else. I didn't know the Bible talked about that. But the Bible talks about relevant things in our lives, and I think that's what's cool about it. But here's basically getting to the very point of what God is trying to say what sex is for. Sex is for a husband and a wife, and it's something for them to share together because of what we looked at in chapter 6. That it's this special union that happens, that comes together, and that brings intimacy with those two people together to share that nobody else on earth can experience. And so when you go outside of that context, it takes on a whole different meaning, because the union still happens, but now it's with people you're not spending your life with. And so instead of this intimate moment, it can cause a whole lot of other complications or distractions or whatever. So let me just give you an example real quick. Hang on a second. I got some stuff here. So think of it this way. God's design for sex was to be in the context of marriage. So think of it like a fire, right? So let's pretend that you are you're out camping in the middle of the forest, and there's a lot going on out there, and it's cold out. What does fire do? Fire does a couple things for you. It keeps you warm. It helps you cook food. So fire in and of itself is a good thing when it's contained in its context. So we got this little Kleenex here. If I were to light it on fire, and if I keep it contained within this, I'm not really worried about it. I'm not worried about Marla catching on fire over here, because remember, she is valuable. I'm not worried about my computer or burning the building down, right? I'll even add some more fire. Actually, it feels really good. But here's the thing. Inside this context, it works great. It's contained. It's serving its purpose. I hope I don't set the alarms off. But what if I were to take all these Kleenexes? Ooh! Like I said, keep it in the context. But what if I were to take all these Kleenexes, give Marla one. What if I were to set these on fire? That'd be a whole different ballgame. Because now it's not just there to keep me warm or something to cook over. Now it's about to burn something that's very valuable to me, Marla, or my computer. And then it could eventually catch this desk on fire, and maybe the building, and then I'd probably be fired because I burnt the building down. So it's not a good thing. So that is essentially what sex is, and that's a good illustration of it. Within the context of marriage, it is this beautiful thing that has a purpose. Outside of that, it can lead to a lot of destruction and burning things down and taking away things that are valuable. So here's the thing. So now we understand what is God's design for sex, to be within marriage. But the question is still, well, what do we do about that? If I want to value sexual integrity, then how do I do that? Because remember, sexual integrity is choosing to respond to the sexual things we feel, think, and desire in a way that honors, that respects ourselves, others, and God. So how do I actually put that into application in my life? Because it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to do it. So there's 3 things I want to focus on here. And we'll get rid of these things real quick. But here's the thing. First, you want to value and respect yourself. And to me, I'm going to try not to get on a soapbox here, because this is something I care so deeply about that I see so many people failing to do, is you don't really value and respect yourself. So what does that mean? Well, first, you have to begin to see yourself the way that God sees you. And the way God sees you is as a masterpiece. In Ephesians chapter 2, verses 10, it says that you are my masterpiece. He created you, and he created you special and unique, just like Marla over here that is unique and one of a kind. You are special and unique, and you are one of a kind, and you are important to him. So when someone asks you to send you pics, or when someone asks you to sleep with them, or to do this with them, or to do that with them, value yourself enough to say no, because you are an important person, and you don't have to find your value and your worth in what somebody else thinks about you, or if they love you, or any of that kind of stuff. So value yourself. Or what about when you're deciding what to wear or what to post on social media? Value yourself enough to choose modesty. For some reason, there's something inside of us, and this is our sinful nature inside of us, that we want the attention and the affection of other people so bad that we're willing to put our bodies out there as an attractor. And when we're doing that, we are basically devaluing ourselves, and we're not respecting ourselves and our own bodies that God has given us. And so I want to encourage you to value yourself. That's how you choose sexual integrity. Value yourself, because you belong to God, and God has prepared somebody special for you. So save your body for that person. Save it for that moment when it's confined into the right context, when it can be used for good and not for destruction. And in the meantime, you have your own purposes that God has given you. So use your purposes to bring fulfillment to your life, because it's far more fulfilling than any kind of temporary pleasure that you're going to have or you're going to get from somebody liking you on social media, or thinking you're hot and writing comments or whatever it is. Don't find value in other people. Learn to value yourself and see yourself the way that God sees you. Second thing you need to do is learn to value and respect others. In the same way that you need to learn to see yourself the way that God sees you, we need to learn to see other people the way that God sees them. And we need to respect them and understand that they are a specific masterpiece that God has created, and he has a purpose for their life. And so I don't need to be asking them to do things that are inappropriate, or I don't need to be sending them things that would cause them to fall into sexual sin, because that is not respecting them and not valuing them as a person. Because here's something I want you to think about. Understand that the person that you're dating or talking to or whatever it is most likely somebody else's future spouse. Take time to let that sink in. I know that you're probably like, no, we're going to get married. Maybe, maybe not. But that could be somebody else's future spouse. So treat them the way that you would want somebody else to treat your future spouse. Because most likely there's somebody else out there that is your future spouse, and you want to make sure that they're valued. And so learn to value people and respect other people. And when you do that, it helps you make the better choices to choose sexual integrity. And the last thing would be to value and respect God. So you got to start seeing God for who he really is. And he's a loving Father who basically sacrificed everything to be with you. He gave up everything. He sent his only son to come to this earth to pay a price that we couldn't pay so that we could spend eternity with him. That's how much God loves you. And for some reason, it's very hard for us to see that sometimes, especially sometimes when we look through the lens of our own fathers or looking through our own experiences. It's hard for us to see this God who actually cares about me and loves me. But can I tell you that he does? Can I tell you that when you read the Bible, that's what the whole book is all about? It's basically his love letter to you saying, here's everything that I've done. Here's how I gave up everything for you. And then here's how you can begin to live your life so that ultimately we can spend an eternity together in paradise. That's what it's all about. So you have to learn to value and respect God and God's plan for your life. Because if he's your creator, if he's the one that made this masterpiece that is known as you, then he knows how you best work. And Jesus put it this way in Mark chapter 12. He said this. He said, "And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength." And the second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. No other commandment is greater than these. You see, when we begin to choose sexual integrity, we're choosing to value God. We're choosing to value others as we value ourselves. We're basically living out the two greatest commandments that God has given us. And that's something that you can begin to do right now. You see, because we serve a God who is merciful and loving and offers grace, He's a God who forgives. So up to this point, maybe you've made mistakes. Maybe you've done things you shouldn't have done. But the past, when you ask for forgiveness, the past becomes the past, and God moves on from it. And so you have a choice right now to choose, am I going to be a person of sexual integrity? Because you can choose that right now today, and I promise you, it is something that will forever change your life. Because for me, it did. I'll tell you the story, and then we'll close with this. When I was probably in 8th grade, I remember my youth pastor talking about basically this topic. And of course, I was in 8th grade. I probably didn't know a whole lot that was going on. And I don't remember anything that he actually talked about. But there's one thing that I remember from this night that completely changed everything for me. He had a piece of paper and a pen and an envelope over at this table. And he said, "I want you to write a letter to your future spouse. I want you to write a letter to your future spouse, put your name on it, put the date on it, and basically tell them, write a letter to them saying that, you know what, from this day forward, I am choosing you. I am choosing sexual integrity, and I am choosing to save myself for you because you were the person that God's created for me." So that's what I did. I wrote a letter, I put it in an envelope, and I put it on it to my future wife. And then, I was in 8th grade, I wasn't going to be using it for a while, so I threw it in a box. But here's what that did for me. It completely changed the way that I viewed sex. Because I actually valued sex, and it was something that I wanted to present as a gift to my wife, from that day forward, I was able to say, you know what? Whatever day it is, March 12th, 1993, I don't know. I'm saving myself for you. And it completely changed the way that I viewed sex, and it made it easy to say no. Because just like Marla here, just like we value Marla, and it's easy for us to say, no, Marla, you're not going on this sleepover. You're staying in the room. You're doing that. It made it easy for me to say no to sex when temptations came my way because I valued sex and I valued God's plan and design for it. Because when you value something, you protect it. You admire it, and you make sure you do anything that you can to not cause damage to it. And that's what choosing sexual integrity does. It's not just some happy little thing to do because the church said so, but it gives you the ability to say, you know what, this is something I care about, and I'm going to hang on to that. And so when my wedding day came, I didn't have this letter because somehow in college it got thrown away. But I was still able to give this gift to my wife because I valued her and I valued my body, understanding that it was God's and God's design for sex. And that's what God's asking us to do. Not to keep us from something, not to keep us from experiencing something, but to keep us contained, to keep the fire inside the campfire doing what it was designed to do, not outside causing destruction and burning down houses. That's God's design. But here's the thing. It's your choice. You're the one that gets to choose. And I want to encourage you to choose sexual integrity. And I would even encourage you to do this. Get you a pen and a paper and just write a note to your future spouse and then seal it and then hang on to it. Don't put it in a box that can get thrown away when you go to college. But hang on to it and let that be the gift that you give to your future spouse one day. Here's the deal. I love you guys. I care about you. I want what's best for you. That's why we're talking about these things. Not because it's a fun topic to talk about, but because for me, it completely changed my life. And that one decision is probably, if I look back, one of the greatest decisions I ever made. And I want that same thing for you. So I love you. We're going to finish up this series next week with part 4 and wrap it all together. But choose sexual integrity and just see what difference that can make in your life. Love you guys.